Thi Nguyen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I want to start off with a big, broad question, maybe not the most philosophically precise question. Just like, why are games fun?
There are so many answers to that. Um, I've been I've given much more complicated answers, but the first thing, maybe the dumbest answer, I'm starting to think is one of the deepest, which is that games are actually designed to be fun. And not all games, and a lot of games are designed for something else, like to extract money out of you or to motivate you to work harder or whatever. But a lot of the games we find fun it's not an accident. It's like a ultra careful fine tuning process. And one of the things, there are all kinds of meta things I can say, but one of the things I've been doing is I've been teaching a class. So I'm at the University of Utah, and University of Utah has I think maybe the world's biggest game design program. It's one of the reasons I'm there. I'm teaching classes. I've been teaching a class co-taught with a game design faculty, Jose Zagal, and we're doing a philosophy of art class that's half theory and half workshop, where students design things, and in response to like philosophy of art. And designing for fun is so delicate. And if you like are just tweak a few little bits in the incentive structure or tweak a few little rules, the fun will fall out of things. And then you like have to do this. I mean, one of the weird things about games is that people think fun is mysterious. It's not for game designers. Like there are micro issues of exactly how you pace the timing and exactly how you pace the rules that seem to like emerge. Maybe this will be, a lot of people are most impressed by the game designs that are elaborate and complicated and multi-ruled. But in hardcore game designers, board game space, a lot of what people are most impressed by is a 5 rule party game that's fun, because that's the hardest thing to build and the hardest thing
Mhm.
to tweak, and often takes years of design. Maybe that's a philosophically boring answer, but I think like it's important to acknowledge that these things are designed objects that have been uh, uh, subject to like um, brutal design cycles and micro tweaking. And a lot of the times when people come in, one of the things that here, okay, let me here's my best demonstration of how hard the game design is. A lot of the times, someone who's not a game designer, either an administrator or maybe a professor, will be like, I have an idea for a fun ice breaking activity. And they'll throw down some rules that are like, this will be fun. And they all fail completely, because
Mhm.
designing for fun is like a lifelong expertise.
What I find so weird about games that I like, if I'm playing video games, I have two very different kinds of preferences when I play
Yeah.
games. One of them is that like I really like games like Stardew Valley, which are like very cozy. But then my other like love are roguelikes, which are so
Yes.
frustrating. Um,
Uh,
I played some Slay the Spire before I went to bed last night, which is one of my favorite games. And I didn't make it to the last level a single time last night. It was an intentionally frustrating experience, and I went to bed so happy. I loved that sense of frustration. I think that's the weirder thing is like
yeah.
games that are incredibly frustrating, or maybe frustrating is not the right word, but there's something, the challenge about them is like
Yeah.
what makes you want to keep playing and makes it much more satisfying.
I mean, we actually probably have a very similar groove. I Roguelikes are probably the center of my video game universe. I have
Mhm.
strong views about roguelikes. By the way,
Mhm.
sidebar, have you played Dream Quest or Monster Train?
I have not played those. No.
Uh, uh, this is not philosophy at all. This is just like game geekery.
Yeah,
Dream
yeah.
Quest was the iteration for Slay the Spire. It's
Oh, okay.
leaner, more brutal. The
Mhm.
graphics are terrible. When originally released, there was only one mode, difficulty
Mhm.
mode, that's now considered the hardest difficulty mode. I think when I
Okay,
played
yeah.
it, it took me 3 days to survive 5 moves, um,
Okay.
and I loved it. Monster Train, sidebar, Monster Train is Slay the Spire crossed with Plants vs Zombies row style tower defense, where you use your cards to play things into defense rows. Anyway. So this is the other. I thought when you were, I mean, fun is super complicated. When you asked about fun, I was immediately thinking about the laughter.
Hmm.
social part of fun, which is, I think in a lot of game design circles, like when they use the word fun a little more technically, they're talking about fun games versus they tend to talk about, I don't know, absorbing games. But I also have the same experience with you, that most of what I love is intensely, gruelingly difficult
Hmm.
and um, involves mostly failure
Hmm.
and pushing your way intensely to get tiny moments of success.
Hmm.
Um, I have a theory about why that is deeply enjoyable for us. And
Hmm.
part of that theory is that in games unlike ordinary life, you can seek exactly the balance of difficulty, frustration, skill, and success that suits you and suits you in that mode. And that, unlike the world says, now you must work on this thing at this difficulty. And you might be like, I don't want to do this. This is too boring. Or I don't know want to do this. This is too hard. You can, I mean, I think in the background, the choice structure is that you get to choose whether you're playing Stardew Valley or Slay the Spire. And
Hmm.
that ability to adapt the challenge environment to you makes it much more possible to find the deliciousness wherever it may lie for you or
Hmm.
it.
This is probably related to our mutual love of rock climbing. Uh, because
Yes.
with rock climbing, they've got this great grading system, and you could just say if I can't do a V5, I'll just go find a V3 or a V, or every
Yep.
good bouldering gym has colors or something. If I
Yep.
can't do the purple, I'll go do a
Yeah.
green. And it's
Yeah.
like, but I actually I love that sense of failure too.
Yeah.
Like you've been working on a problem for days and you're thinking if you're at a gym, they're going to reset in a week and you're thinking, all
Yeah.
right, when can I get back? Because even if I
Yeah.
don't make it, I want to make one more, I want to get to the next hold. I want to make that weird complicated move. And then when you unlock it, that sense of moving your body in just the right way, in a way maybe you didn't even know you could, that feels so good. There's like this immense satisfaction to it.
Rock climbing taught me a lot, and I also want to be cautious when I say this because there's a kind of serious culture discussion of games which I hate, which is games are useful only insofar as they like build grit or build skill or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they are amazing in and of themselves, but also they also teach you things. And often the way they're amazing in and of themselves and the way they teach you things are incredibly carefully interlocked. Like, for me, climbing is what taught me to pay attention to my body and the way my body moved. Um, and part of it was exactly the difficulty scale. I think without the difficulty scale, I would have floated around on the rock for a while and gotten bored. And the difficulty scale structured my goals enough that I had to force myself to tune into my body. And it also like gave me feedback. Godfrey Devereux, who's one of my favorite yoga writers, has this amazing passage where he says one of the reasons we do yoga is not because it. What he says is a lot of us want meditation, but fail at seated meditation. And I think what he says is like, because in seated meditation, when your mind wanders, you don't notice because your mind has wandered. But when you're in a hard yoga pose, if your mind wanders, then you wobble, and
Mm-hmm.
that feedback tells you, oh, go back. And I had the same thing. I had a huge amount of trouble attending to my body, and the intense feedback of first the game says do something really hard for you, which I normally wouldn't do, and then the environment and the challenge says if you don't pay perfect attention, we're gonna slap you and you're gonna fall.
Yeah.
And that feedback loop really helps me tune in. And I think like the the fact that I think climbing is a particularly neat example of this because in a lot of games the choice of difficulty is kind of hidden in the background. Like you change the difficulty level by changing games or maybe by
Mm-hmm.
changing opponents. But rock climbing has the thing and I think it's even I think there are a lot of I don't know a lot of video games, even when they have a difficulty level, it's not part of naturally the way you interact with it to change the difficulty level during play. That feels like
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of us like kind of off. But with rock climbing, I have that experience. Like sometimes I'll be climbing things that would normally be challenging will be a little easy, and to get the difficulty I crave, I'll like push against something harder. And
Mhm.
sometimes, more often these days, I'm tired and I feel old and exhausted, and I can't even like make a go at what was difficulty for me last time. And so I like scale it down, like drop a couple of view levels until it's just the right thing. So that like I think it really surfaces the subtle degree of like choice space we have to find. And I mean, I suspect that you and I like the same degree of intense challenge, and so it
Mhm.
gives us both the choice of the type of challenge by moving between games. It gives us choice about the degree of challenge to get the sense of difficulty we want, and then it gives us choice about whether we want high difficulty, medium difficulty. All
Yeah.
of that stuff is like kind of background adaptable for us, and that's like kind of the miracle of the choice space of games.
I've only sustained one major injury from climbing. I mean, everyone who climbs
Yeah.
has lots of minor injuries at various points,
Right.
but I cracked my fibular head, so I broke my leg while climbing, and it was on a warm up climb. And it was this, and I think this is so funny because it was maybe the second hardest difficulty level at the gym I was climbing at that day. It
Right.
was my second climb of the day, and what I thought was, um, I can skip that hold because this is an easy climb, and I skipped a hold thinking I could just go for something cool, and it was like that. And there's one way to tell that story, which is like, look how stupid I was, and there's another way to tell this story about like, look how dangerous climbing was. But I think when I think about it, it was like I was just craving a certain kind of experience. I rushed to get that experience. I rushed
Yeah.
to get the difficulty I was getting ready for, and that led to
Right.
a problematic result.
Right.
Um, and a way in which sometimes maybe difficulty scales can also be a slightly misleading. Like if
Yeah.
someone gives you a scale and they say, "Oh, this is an
Yeah.
easy climb. We've rated it."
Right.
There might be something particular about it that actually makes it quite hard for you.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're all. I mean, you're opening up two completely universes to talk about right now.
okay.
One is about the pleasure of games, and the other is about the data compressiveness of like seemingly objective scales.
Mhm.
Um, but
Let's stick with the pleasure of games because we're going to get to the data oppressiveness in there.
yeah, no, I was
I'm
thinking this.
trying not to lead with dystopia.
I was actually genuinely thinking that jumping to the horror of metrics right now would be like jumping to a too difficult climb during your warm up.
Yeah, let's warm up a bit more.
My brain's not ready for it. It's gonna sprain. I
Yeah.
just like got my kids off to school. I'm not ready for despair yet. Um, yeah, I think you're making me realize something. I hadn't quite thought about this as much for climbing. I've been when I was writing the book, I was thinking about it more with fly fishing, but I had an original model with games where the game set an exact uh, mental state and attitude, and you entered into that when you
Mhm.
entered the game. And I think that's because my model for a lot of thinking about this is a kind of board game experience where the difficulty level is fairly set by the rules and the players. And a lot of board games, especially the board games I'm into, crave a very particular kind of intensity, and if you back away from it, you'll not only not get the goodness, but you'll kind of let down the other people that want a similar experience, be it
Mhm.
an intense experience or a light playful experience. But um when I was writing this book, I ended up thinking a lot more about both like kind of more weirdly variable video game spaces and things like rock climbing and fly fishing. And I started to think about how much we micromodulate the experience. Like, I think during games, we both plunge ourselves into a goal to have an experience of absorption and often step back and are able to like modulate what that goal is to like chase down a particular kind of experience. Like you can do the same thing in fly fishing. You can go for a chiller, more zoned out experience, or you can do this like intense, hyper visually intensive experience of trying to visually find feeding fish to like cast to a feeding fish. And I've just been, I think you're making me realize the degree to which there's this careful modulation of the game experience, even in the process of warming up, where you're
Mhm.
interacting, you're like changing the nature of the game and feeling your body and feeling your mood, and then like, and you can get it wrong. And I've done this thing. I think I'm, I am older than you, and these days, like, if I get the warm up experience wrong, I will whack my shoulder and climbing is done for the day. And I like,
It's going to be a bad time. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be a bad time.
I haven't gone climbing very often in the last year or so because we started having kids, and I used to always climb with my wife. And it turns
Yep.
out it's a little bit hard. But there was the thing about, I think there were days I went to the gym. I mostly climbed indoors because I just live in Austin. It's a little bit easier, right? Um, and uh, I could, yeah. So there's like sort of two distinct experiences. One of them was there were days I went to the gym and thought, I just need something easy. I just want to be on the
Yep.
wall for a while. So I'm picking
Yep.
that meditative experience.
Yep.
Really sit with the holds, kind of feel,
Yep.
even testing things. If I lean a little bit more, how does that feel?
Yeah.
And I would just climb the whole session like that and not do anything impressive, not do anything challenging. And then there was another kind of day where, and then there would be days, of course, where I wanted hard stuff and I would just warm up and then immediately throw myself at the same problem for 2 hours and leave defeated but feeling satisfied. But then yeah, then there are those other days where what I want starts to shift. And I think that was kind of
Yep.
nice. Like the whole 2 hours,
Yep.
2 or 3 hours when you're there, you get to just like be in control of your
Yeah.
experience in a really nice way, which is related to something that you said earlier, which is that life often does not give us that sense of control.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And so we games kind of give us a sense of power over our circumstances.
Yeah.
And of course, a sense of power over our values, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Uh, and I'm really fascinated by this. I mean, I want to admit something to you. I saw your book Games, Agency as Art when it came out, and I hadn't read it yet. And I thought to myself, like, how interesting could games be? And I was even someone who liked them, but I was like,
Yeah.
I was a logic and language guy in grad school,
Yeah.
and so my thought was like, there's, I mean, I repent of all of this way of thinking, to be clear, but my thought was like, there's like real philosophy, and then there's games stuff. What is that? And then I read
Yeah.
your work, and I was like, oh my god, they're endlessly fascinating. I repent of my philosophical chauvinism. Like, like this is such a fascinating space to play around in.
And I didn't realize it at first. By the way, side comment: how old is your kid?
My first kid is 2.5. My second kid is 5 months.
Take your kid to the gym.
We're planning on going with my son soon. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He's
Yeah.
I think he's ready. You know, I used to go climbing with a group, and they adopted a son. And when
Yeah.
they adopted him, from the time he was 1 month old, we took him to the gym, and we would just take turns holding him.
Yeah.
And then he got old enough, he just like laid on the mat, and everyone was
Yeah.
totally cool with it. Everyone loved, actually, climbing gyms. I don't think people realize this. They're incredibly chill places.
Yeah.
They're like, I mean, you'll have assholes, but most people are just like so happy to be doing something, and so like they're totally fine with a giggling baby just hanging out
I mean,
a safe
our
distance away.
kids, I think from the time they were 3 or 4 months old, we just took them to the gym and held them. Or, I mean, random recommendation: there's a little cheap fold out portable like baby crawl zone, and
Oh, okay.
there's like at least a year of each of the kids' life where we just go to the gym, throw them in the crawl zone, hang out with them in Boulder, and it works great. And
Okay.
you know,
I'm going to tell my wife. She'll be very happy to hear
yeah,
this.
yeah. No, I mean, 2 people and 2 kids at the gym. We have kids about your age range. It's as long as you're just bouldering and not on a rope, it's great.
Yeah.
So I mean, let me. I actually, when I started working on games, I did not realize that they were as interesting as I found them to be. Like when I started working on it, I was just going to write one little paper because I was annoyed. I was
Mhm.
annoyed that there were like, I'd read a couple books on the philosophy of video games, and they were all using like cinema theory, and I was just like, this is dumb. And I was
Mhm.
just going to write one thing. And each time I wrote one thing, it would like open up another structure. And I would be just like, what? This is so. And I kept feeling like I was stumbling forward. Like I didn't really think I was going to do a lot of stuff in games. And I think part of it is that when you have this frame of games as a kind of fiction,
Mhm.
you're attending to fairly familiar parts of them that are well studied elsewhere. There's not a huge amount to say. And I think when you start attending, when you get this, I think the big unlock was it's in this all of the stuff I've written, but you know, Reiner Knizia, the game designer, saying like points give you the motivational system. I think the
Mhm.
first big unlock I got was I was sitting around with some friends drunk, and I was like, oh, I think games aren't, they're not the most important thing isn't they're fiction. They're like art governments. They're like governments for fun, where
Mhm.
you play around with rule sets and incentives and shape people's actions, but not just to rule them,
Mhm.
but to create a beautiful experience. And I think when you start thinking about that, then they become incredibly rich. And I think the place I've gotten to is the thing that you're touching on right now, which is, I mean, one way to think about it is in in ordinary another way to say the thing we said before was in ordinary practical life, mostly the ends are fixed and mostly the methods are fixed, and you have a little bit of leeway with choice of method, and then the experience is kind of dragged along by the world, and then you get to nudge it a tiny bit. But with games, there's so much plasticity in the method and goal, and you have so much fine grain over that to like engineer an experience for you both within the game and outside the game, that
Mhm.
like, I don't know, this is part of why it starts to seem so tragic when people don't reflectively maneuver like this. I keep
Mhm.
running fishing. I keep running into people who, there's a particular method of fishing which is extremely efficient. It's called euro nymphing. It gets you the most fish, and some people find it really interesting. But for a lot of people, it's kind of like less exciting than other ways of fishing. And I keep
Mhm.
running into people saying like, I don't like euro nymphing. I prefer these other methods. But you gotta euro nymph because you catch more fish. P.S. Catch and release fishers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that there's this raw impulse that is part of what's in the background of the new book. And the raw impulse is just to be like, what the hell are we doing? Like, what are we even doing here? I have the exact same impulse towards philosophers who are writing boring philosophy to
Mhm.
like, that they hate to move up this philosophy stats. It's like, what are, what are we doing? And I think the thing you're describing is the exact opposite of that. It's like full consciousness of how much freedom and control you have over the gaming environment.
I don't think people realize if they're not in academia, and especially if they're not in philosophy, academia is metrics obsessed.
Yeah.
There are metrics for everything, and I think philosophy might be more metrics obsessed than many other humanities. That's just my
Yep.
suspicion. We have
Yep.
rankings for programs. So it meant if you were a grad student and you met other grad students, you could immediately place them in a hierarchy with you. And then
Right.
there were ways
Right.
to sort of game that hierarchy to think like, well, they're at a better program, but I've published more papers. And I
Right.
published
Right.
at this journal rather. I mean, it's very, very easy to fall into that way of thinking, even in a place that is ostensibly dedicated to the life of thought and intellectual
I,
inquiry.
let me say one thing. I think this will presage some presage. I don't even know how to say that word. Presage, whatever. Um, Stuff that I suspect we'll talk about later. But I became really aware of this and really aware of this thing that when I was a grad student, of like people running into each other at a conference, and your name would just flicker down to their name, each other's name badge to see the institution, and you could see like this thing. And the first conference I threw, I did something, and it's becoming more common now. But when I did it, it was one of the first times I think I'd seen it done, and I just didn't print anyone's institutional rankings on name badges or the program.
Mhm.
And people told me afterwards that it mattered a lot. Like it really changed the experience. Um, and I think this is about like, we know the systems are there, but there's actually an enormous change just in how accessible the rankings are. I think like experiments with hi- people used to have a filter for Twitter where you could put on the filter and it would hide how many likes and retweets comments had, and that like really like the rankings are already there, but it's when you make them prominent, they leach into our brains so much that just the simple act of removing them from the primary signifiers at a conference will like deeply change people's experience of like basic socialization, which I think is like kind of wild, both about how deeply it gets into us and how not in all contexts and not across all incentives, but how easy at least to manipulate to some degree the degree it's prominent in our consciousness through just like dumb little shit.
So I think if we were talking about your new book, The Score,
Yeah.
one way of explaining this is like you have a theory of games, You kind of give that theory early on in the book. And then you have a sort of theory of, I don't know if you ever really give it a name for this, but like of negative gamification,
Right.
the way in which, or pernicious gamification, in which metrics are imposed and we start playing these games in the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And of course, the big question that you open up uh, at the end of the first chapter is just like, is this the game that I want to be playing? So tell me a little bit about sort of what led you to go from thinking about games, the source of joy and pleasure, to thinking
Yeah.
about this sort of pernicious gamification.
I was writing my first book, which is almost completely like a love ode to games and what point scoring systems do for us in games. And towards the end, as I was writing it, people were like, "Oh, you love games, so you must love gamification. So, are you going to explain why gamification works so well and give us recommendations for how to gamify the classroom?" And I was like, "Fuck no, I hate gamification." And I at that point, it was just like an impulse. I didn't fully understand why, but my first gut sense was that there was something that if you actually understood what was good about games, and a lot of it is what we've been talking about this whole time, this degree of freedom, like with respect to the game, then you'll see that like forced pervasive gamifications are kind of horrible. And so I started writing about this, and I made a stab that was incorrect in my first book, and I've made a number of stabs at it. I think that the term I'm using for the process is value capture. So value capture
Mhm.
is when your values are rich and subtle, and then you get presented with a simplification of it in an institutional setting, typically a quantified ones. And the simplification takes over your reasoning and your deliberation and seizes your attention and sees it. It starts to replace your values. I mean, I think it happens constantly. And one crucial note for everyone listening, it's the crucial thing about value capture is it's not just about incentives. It's not just about instrumental resources, because when someone offers you an instrumental resource, you can, if it differs from your value, you can at least make a trade-off calculus and decide to be like, no, I don't, I'm going to limit how much I chase that resource. But if it's all the way in you, you just go for it.
So just to, I mean, I was just listing off examples. Some are from your book.
Yeah.
Language learning apps use gamification, where it becomes about
Yeah.
getting points. I don't know how many people are actually learning German from Duolingo.
Yeah.
Um, Fitness trackers
Yep.
might be an example of this. Law school rankings is an example straight from your book.
Yep.
Just all in my own world of YouTube, um, views, likes, comments,
Yep.
revenue. You know, like
Yep.
these
Yep.
become the markers of good videos, rather than thinking about educational quality or
Yep.
entertainment value, or you know, just making something you're proud of.
Yep.
Because one of the things you note is that most of, when you said that our values are rich and subtle, um, they're qualitative usually, and
Yep.
they can be even a bit ambiguous. We would express them differently in different contexts. They
Yep.
might even shift with us, and
Yep.
that is actually, we're analytic philosophers, so we're thinking, well, let's take the ambiguous and make it precise. But
Yep.
actually, part of your book might be the ambiguity of it is like where the freedom is.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
having that ambiguity is good,
Yes.
and it gives you a sense of ownership and agency. And in fact, what happens with value capture, you call it also value clarity, though that's more about in the games, but you can
Yep.
get like kind of fake clarity. You
Yep.
think it's clarifying something, but it's actually simplifying it and reducing it to something, and maybe even shifting the topic. It's like shifting the subject while clarifying.
Oh my god. So there's okay. There's just a billion things I want to say now. The first thing to say is, um, when I started doing this, I mostly used the term gamification, and I've started to back away from that because I think gamification um, makes focuses people's attention on like intentionally gamified apps
Mhm.
like Duolingo, Fitbit, maybe Twitter. And I thought when I was starting to work on this stuff, that I was mostly going to talk about a local, maybe decade or two long phenomenon of intentional gamification. What I've come to think is what actually matters is the long progress over the last 1,000 years of an
Mhm.
emphasis on institutional accountability at scale, and that the gamifications that present it on the surface like that are just like one tiny tip of this long march towards increasingly large-scaled, increasingly cross-cutting quantitative measuring systems. And so I think this is exactly right. This is one of the things I find most interesting. Like in the background, it's not, I haven't quite written it yet, but the thing I've been chasing is an attempt to explain why a lot of our values might be better captured by ambiguous, fuzzy, rough language or by poetic, metaphorical language, and where there's some kind of essential loss when we try to explicate things in this way. It really, I mean, I really feel like I'm using analytic philosophy to fuck with analytic philosophy. What comes out of this is like a diagnosis of why we are obsessed with having ultra clear definitions, both in bureaucratic institutions and in philosophy, and what we lose from that.
Let me give the listener just a little bit of context, because not everyone here is going to be too familiar with analytic philosophy. It's not uncommon in an analytic philosophy paper to describe an opponent's view or someone else's view and then say, but premise two is quite unclear, which is to
Yeah,
say, we are casting doubt on premise two. I will now show why this lack of
yeah,
clarity is actually this huge problem. And sometimes it is, but and then when you're being taught, like in graduate school, and you're going through endless sessions with your advisor, it's clarity, clarity, clarity. I mean, I would say
right.
clarity and rigor in analytic philosophy are often used as synonyms.
Yeah, yeah,
And so to have some kind of misgiving about some versions of clarity is a little bit like committing fratricide.
yeah. It is, it is. And I'm trying to be as clear as possible in
Yeah.
my analysis of what's wrong with clarity. Although you might also think there are different modes to approach things, and there are things that poets can do, and philosophers, whatever. I mean, this is to me like the most interesting thing now.
Mhm.
Like, um, so there are two dimensions, and I think they're not quite the same, and we should separate them. So one of them is when things are ambiguous, we have more degrees of freedom. We can reinterpret for ourselves. And the other is it might be that there's a real value there, but the value is such, or the important thing is such, that drawing a clear, definable line is going to miss that there's an essential fuzziness to the structure of the real thing. There are a lot of possibilities here. Um, I mean, when I was trying to think about this, I actually couldn't get any help from my field, philosophy. The best explanations I found were in a neighboring field called science and technology studies, which is anthropologists, historians, uh, communication scholars, sociologists. And a lot of that field is really interested in the culture of bureaucracy. And there are
Mhm.
two figures that their books like took my mind apart: Theodore Porter and Lorraine Daston. So Theodore Porter has this explanation of, uh, so he has this book, Trust in Numbers, where he's trying to explain why bureaucrats and administrators often compulsively reach for quantitative justification, even when it's unimportant, or sorry, um, even when the quantitative justifications we know to be bad, we know they're bad metrics, something we still want them. And his explanation is that qualitative communication and justification is rich and open-ended and context-sensitive, but it travels badly between contexts because it
Mhm.
requires high background information to understand. So I always think about grading my students' papers, right? Like when you're grading your students' papers, you can use the particular language you've developed, not just in, say, philosophy, but in your classroom. You can have developed together a sense of like what a delicate argument is, an interesting argument. You uh, can move in multiple dimensions. And I think that's like if a student is really, you can compare them and be like, oh, this is really creative, but your writing is really hard to read. And you can also even look at what they're trying to do and be different. Like a student that's trying to carefully read a text is really different from a student that's trying to like do this big. And you can respond in kind to each of these things,
Mhm.
but distant deans won't understand them, and it's hard. They don't automatically aggregate into one thing for like someone in HR, right?
Mhm.
There's if a student has 2,000 qualitative evaluations, they're 2,000 qualitative evaluations. So what Porter says is quantitative information in institutions, in bureaucracies, is designed, and it's designed to travel between contexts and make aggregation possible. And it's designed to do so by removing any criteria that require a huge amount of context or background or sensitivity to understand. So here, obviously, like letter grades. Letter grades are entities that travel easily, are easily understood across context, and instantly aggregate mechanically, precisely because we've ripped out everything outside of a single simple dimension with single like approximate meanings for A, B, C, D, and F. And so, I mean, this is, Porter, I think what Porter taught me, and this is like half of it, is that the thing that makes, say, metrics incredibly socially powerful is precisely that they have had context stripped out of them. That is like the thing that makes them communicatively uh, and socially hefty is the narrowness and thinness. Like it's a design feature and a design bug in one.
Mhm.
That's the functionality. And I think it's broader than that. It's also. I mean, Heath is mostly thinking about talking about quantification, but I think it's also just a general account of this demand for clarity, like what we have in various parts of philosophy and the law, which is what makes it something clear is that everyone will understand it in the same way. And you don't need like an enormous amount of time spent in the jazz community listening to like things and getting examples to see it. Anyone can see it. It's transferable. That's like half of the picture
Yeah.
of clarity. And I just find that so interestingly both explanatory and damning of the expectation that everything good is clear.
There's an example from James C. Scott's book, Seeing Like a State,
Yep.
which is functions on that concept of legibility, that the
Yep.
governing
Yep. Yep.
powers want to render the territory legible. And he goes
Yep.
through things that you would talk about too, and I'm sure Porter does, like measuring land to talk about.
Yep.
In you have, but there's one example that sticks in my head, which is the example of a Welshman who has to go to an English court, and they ask him for his name, and his name is like Jonathan App William App, and because in
Right.
Welsh you use this app to signify lineage, and he would just
Right.
list off his father, grandfather,
Right.
and in his village or his context that would be an incredibly informative way of
Right.
describing himself. But in the legal system, it was useless, and so the court just gave him a last name. And so they said, no, we need like a name for the record, and we're not going to put 7 other people's names down. Where so that that stripped. There's two interesting things about this. It was very information dense, but it was very context sensitive or context dependent.
Yep.
You needed to have a lot of background context in order to understand his name.
Yep.
But if you did have that, it would actually tell you his family story
Yeah.
in an interesting way. You could place him in your social setting to make him more legible to the state. Um, all of that context had to be stripped away, and so it makes him more easier to document and maybe
Right.
to write about in a legal document. But it destroys all of the information in the process. That's
Yep.
what I worry about with clarity. Is that in the pursuit of clarity, we also engage in this information destruction that we don't even realize, which I think is the worry that you have.
One of my personal favorite parts from my new book is a part where simple public health measures often win out over complex and subtle ones. Like it's really that it's really easy to defend things in terms of lives saved, um, or like decreased heart attack rates.
Mhm.
Uh, and when you're talking about something like public health recommendations about brie, right? There's stuff on the other side of the scale, like um, deliciousness, tradition, community, joy. But it's just, I mean, I almost feel like sometimes I talk about this in public, and I feel like an asshole because people think that what you're saying is like lives don't matter. And they're like, but look, how many lives? And you're like, no, they matter. But also, there's other stuff that also matters. It's just harder to quantify and it auto loses. And the thing
Mhm.
people often say back is they want to say something like, well, we can't just count such intangibles. And I heard that so many times. And then I thought at one point, like, wait, what's more tangible than brie? right? Like that's real. And when someone says, how do we count such intangibles? What they actually mean is these things are very hard to abstract. And somehow our sense of reality has been displaced such that we think that the only things are real are the things that are countable by a large scale, state friendly process, and that actual physical, obviously beautiful things in front of us are not real because tangibility is the term tangibility has been corrupted away from its actual meaning to mean, and the term reality has, I'm sorry, I'm saying this terribly, but like our notion of reality has been replaced with bureaucratic abstractability. Like that's
Mhm.
become the most important thing.
Like the map is being treated as the territory.
100%.
Yeah.
Um,
I think about
the
this a lot with like fitness trackers
right,
where you know, I over the last couple of years I got like a lot healthier. You know, got to like a much more healthy weight for my body and things
yeah,
like this. And I didn't wear a fitness tracker the whole time.
yeah,
And I had worn one previously. And what I had found that for me, like when I would wear a fitness tracker, I started to value like the completion of the rings or like the
right,
number that I saw
yeah,
to the point where I would even do things to game the system. What are some ways that I can get those rings to close really fast just so I don't break my streak? Rather than thinking about something like, how do I develop a new lifestyle in which I will be healthier and my heart will be stronger and I can play with my kids more?
yeah. I
And
mean,
so
there,
it totally came to dominate my thought world.
yeah, a lot of the experience that I kept having and other people kept having is something like a kind of attentional swamping where so the philosopher Elijah Milgram talks about how the way that you navigate the world of values is you need to test them to see if a particular value or goal fits you and your environment. And the way that you tell that it's fitting, part of it is that you're enlivened, you're rich, you feel like you're thrilled, you're interested. And the part of this, one of the signals that a value isn't working for you well is like despair and boredom and ennui. And one of the things that things like fitness trackers seem to be able to do is they can shout louder than this quiet whisper of like, I'm bored, I'm depressed, this is not, I mean, one of the background thoughts I've had this whole time was I've just been thinking about like the years I spent addicted to the game Civilization, and my experience afterwards was thinking that wasn't fun, and I talked myself into thinking it was fun, and
Mhm.
somehow something about the experience of that game made me treat certain external signals as signals I was having fun, even though my actual experience was kind of like boredom and anxiety sweat. And like
Mhm.
not the kind of like difficulty that leads to a beautiful experience of like, oh, I finally climbed it. Just like relentless anxiety and boredom sweat. And yet I would tell myself this game is so fun. And then it took a long time to look back and say like, no, and I think it's the same thing. Like it took a long time to look back and think like this philosophy work I'm doing that's aiming at this ranking is boring the hell out of me. And I've been
Mhm.
miserable for 2 years. And yet, and I think so. One original explanation I had was just that numbers were very clear in the sense that they were decisive. But I think a bigger explanation that comes via Porter is numbers not only are clear internally, but they're more socially clear. And so there's this feedback loop where not only can you tell yourself, but you can also tell other people very easily why it is that you're doing the thing. Like they're pre-made instant justification systems. And so it's like so hard to tear yourself off from something that's both internally clear and makes you insta socially legible. I mean, one of the things about Scott is his notion of legibility is all top down, but a lot of these systems don't need to be top down. Like if you're in a Fitbit, it might not matter that you're legible to an institution. That's also clear, but uh, the same system makes you instantly legible to any of your friends. Like that's part of what
Mhm.
quantified systems do. And I just find it so striking about us as people that this is something that is utterly possible and utterly common.
And it's like once you enter into this sort of realm of legibility and numbers, to especially in social settings, it becomes nearly impossible to not engage in rankings.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, which of my friends is better, knows baseball better, is wholly determined by your fantasy baseball league, and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
standing there,
Yeah.
and rather than just like how good are they at talking about the game and talking about
Right.
trivia over a drink, or I talk about books a lot on my channel, and just you could easily turn it into who is a better reader becomes who read the most
Yeah.
books on Goodreads.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Goodreads is, I think, a great example of a website because they have a dual scoring system. They score
Yeah.
books and people measure that, but they score you
Yes.
because you can track your reading.
Yes.
And so you
Yes.
can look at it
Yes.
and go, "Oh my god, that guy knows books. He read 100 books last year and I only read 25." And it says nothing about did you read War and Peace 25 times or did it, or it says nothing about the quality of the reading, the quality of the books, the length of the books. And yet we can't resist the simplification and the hierarchy.
Yeah, the one of the big lessons for me from philosophy of technology is one of the best ways to think about the impact of a technological system, and I think metrics are a technological system, is to think about what they make easy and then what they make hard. Like
Yeah.
what kinds of intellectual journeys are so like I mean again the literature on maps, it's like super interesting. Like maps, obviously they need to leave out something or they won't be maps, but
Mhm.
then depending on what they leave out, they make certain interactions incredibly easy. Dennis Woods in The Power of Maps has all these great questions. He's like, why don't maps show sound quality? Why don't they show where the pleasant nature is? That's because the map maker is often interested in things like property lines or commuting by car and not interested in
Mhm.
other things. So maps rise certain kinds of interactions with the world to the fore. I think the super interesting thing, I mean, so one of the big distances between my first book on games and the new book is in the first book, I assumed that every game had a scoring system. And that was because I was focused on board games. I play so many board games. Every board game I play has an official scoring system that delivers a single verdict. And
Mhm.
in between, what I figured out was that was wrong. Like you can totally have a game and a competition without a scoring system. The example from the book is like, you can go to the skate park and skate with your friends, and you can not only come with different goals, even if you have a similar goal, like be the coolest, right?
Mhm.
You can judge that in different ways or along different dimensions. That unclarity gives you a certain degree of freedom. And then the transition to official context like ESPNX, that where there's an official verdict required, that's when you get this movement towards more mechanically easily countable targets like
Mhm.
flips and height of jumps. And that transformation, I mean, is crucial uh, to the process of producing a singular agreed upon verdict. But it
Mhm.
changes the thing we target. Oh my god! Can I tell you the example that got cut from the book because everyone thought it was too icky, or
Please
not
do.
everyone?
Yeah.
Uh, I started reading a lot of the sociology literature on pickup artists.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, you can see where this is going, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's unsurprising that pickup artists say that they're scoring. And one of the really striking things for me in that literature is, I mean, we know the kinds of things that pickup artists compete for: number of sexual encounters in a night, speed to a sexual encounter. And one of the things I found out from the sociologists, there are a bunch of things that they don't compete for. Obviously, not quality of romantic relationships,
Mhm.
but also, and this should have been obvious to me, they don't compete for pleasure, and in fact don't seem to aim at pleasure. So the sociologist Eric Hendricks found that over and over again, pickup artists, a common theme was you have to ignore pleasure and like get the desire for it out of your system because it would just interfere with the process of succeeding and becoming the best. If what you come out of your like, we went to the skate park together, was a set of like, that person did a stylish trick, that person did a cool trick, that person did like a really impressive trick, there's no that system doesn't naturally invite comparisons. It makes comparisons very hard. What it actually makes easy is talking about multidimensionality, and maybe this is too romantic, but it makes easy like what highlights the four is the multiplicity of goodnesses that you could have, right? And
Mhm.
what ranking systems do is they suppress and hide that, and they put that in the background. And the thing they make easiest and that they automate is comparisons on a scale. And it's
Yeah.
just so striking to me. I mean, how how so many systems of evaluation don't have that. So I was just reading with my class this article on value and measurement from Leonardo Filippi, and he makes a comment about intelligence, measuring intelligence. He's trying to show that a lot of measures are very laden, and I think a lot of us are familiar with how IQ tests are racist and sexist in various ways, and that's all true. But then he said something that like took my mind apart a little. He said it's an incredible presumption even that intelligence is a stable quality to be measured. Like that opening presumption is massive. Um, and I was trying to talk about this with my class about why. And I was like, okay, so what would happen if we tried to talk about each other's intellectual and mental abilities without using the singular notion of intelligence? And they were like, oh, we'd have to talk about who is good at being emotionally sensitive and who is good at drawing and who is good at logic. And the system wouldn't automatically output not only a comparison between people, but a comparison between like modes of thinking. Like right now, the system we have insta lets you compare people, and also quietly insta puts like the person that's very good at drawing and emotional sensitivity but not good at math is going to do badly on the score. So it does all that, and all of that highlighting both the weighting of, say, logical and mathematical ability over artistic and emotional sensitivity. That's in the background of the system. And then once it rises to the fore, the single easiest thing it lets you do is make immediate comparisons between people. And that's a product of a particular system. That's not built into the concept of judgment itself.
Yeah. The history of chess is really interesting for this, because ELO has not been with us. Chess is a much older game than the ELO system, right? But people love to talk about like who's the greatest chess player of all time. And I mean, the answer right now, if you're just going strict ELO, is just Magnus Carlsen. Just like he has the biggest number. But then you would ask about players who pre-ELO or before ELO got inflated. There's all of these questions. Yeah. But there's a totally different way to talk about who's like greatness of a chess player. Mikhail Tal, I know you use chess a few times in your book, so I can nerd out for a second. Mikhail Tal, I think almost some of his best games, if you analyze them using the best engines now, you would see that he made a mistake at some point when he makes these like what we would consider brilliant sacrifices. They could be formally refuted, but refuting them was so non-obvious that he knew the risk was worth taking, because he could see some pattern that like if you made one bad move in the next 5 responses, I would have this brilliant checkmate. And so I think he's this amazing chess player. Even though if you just put it in terms of ELO, he wouldn't even be in consideration. Or Paul Morphy existed before the ELO system, and yet he is responsible for some of the most studied and historic games, like the opera game, where any player who wants to start memorizing games memorizes Morphy games. And why is that? Because he was incredibly creative, and it allows you to sort of see his creativity and to memorize it and internalize it. But he didn't just play the optimized engine moves that would maximize your ELO. And this ended up actually being after Bobby Fischer sort of lost his mind. One of the things he said is that chess became less fun when it became a process of memorization. And that's why he wanted to invent variants and things, because he just wanted to see the creativity of like a chess mind on the board. And on top of that, I don't think people know this. Like we study every game now, all of these like openings and things, because they're all available in databases online. When Fischer was competing for the World Chess Championship, getting a copy of your opponent's games was like corporate or sometimes it was actual espionage. Like the KGB would like want to get records of all of Fischer's games or of his prep. And so it was just a completely different world before we introduced this universalized scoring system that would then allow you to just rank the player and sort of takes the fun out of the discussion.
We're so down the line on chess rankings right now that it's easy to forget that there are other bases of goodness. I mean, and you can just like, I think right now a lot of people would find it really shocking if you're like, but what about the most creative chess player or the most stylish chess player? Like those, like even proposing those as values by which you might rank chess play. I mean, I used to play a guy who would do weird opening moves, and his comment would just be like, "Life's too short to play boring chess," right?
Mhm.
Like, and that's I think that attitude was super super valuable to me. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I'm gonna try to win once I do this weird move, but like if I do this weird move, now we're off book, and now I'll probably lose, but things are interesting. And I think like the this is it's such a good symbol of the metric stuff, precisely because I would bet it would be easier. It was more common before Elo for people to say, "This chess player is the most amazing chess player. Look at how stylish and fun or bold their moves are." I've been
Mhm.
watching this happen. So I started yo-yoing. I write about it in the book, and the reason I started yo-yoing was actually book research. I knew about the skateboard competition scene change, and I was looking for new versions. And the same thing has happened in yo-yoing. There's a rise of a competition scene, but excitingly for me, the rise of the competition scene happened during the YouTube era. So there's just way more records, and it's really clear that. Uh, I mean, it hasn't completely changed, but the space of what counted as good yo-yoing was once much wider. There were a lot of tricks that were just done for beauty or grace or flow or just like it was much it was once much more likely that people would admire a trick that was actually an easy trick just because someone did it with maximum grace and expressiveness.
Mhm.
And now the yo-yo competition team is locked in on speed and difficulty,
Mhm.
and there's a kind of narrowness of the tricks that and you can see it happen live.
I think, for me, it sucks a lot of the joy out of those activities.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, I mean, they're so tempting. Like, it seems like every place, every competition, every style of competition moves in this direction. And I'm just curious, are there examples where people have pulled back, institutionally? Personally, probably it's easier to
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think okay, we have to distinguish between clarity of scoring systems in the game. There are a bunch of different things to distinguish. One is the clarity of the scoring system within the game, and the second is the clarity of the purpose for playing. I mean, a lot of what I'm interested in is the fact that a lot of game playing, like kind of non-competitive, non-institutionalized game playing, even though the goals are hyper clear and the scoring system is hyper clear in the game itself, our reasons and purposes for playing are not, and those get involved in a complex feedback loop. So on the ground, what that looks like is you play a game, um, you don't like the scoring system, you change games. Or in a more interesting way, I think, you play a game, you don't love the game, and so you start screwing around with the scoring system. Right now, for me, the most interesting game space where the most interesting game design is happening is the indie tabletop role playing scene, because a
Mhm.
lot of people in that scene started with Dungeons and Dragons, which was such a singular moment. And
Mhm.
then some people loved Dungeons and Dragons, and then some people disliked it and then started modding the game for the sake of. So I think maybe the best counterexample is indie tabletop role playing, but importantly, there's not a competition scene, right? What the
Mhm.
competition scene seems to do is to encourage people instead of it puts a kind of I mean it puts a kind of large scale meta lock on the activity instead of having this freedom to like change the activity to suit you. It puts one version of the activity at high prominence and then doesn't let people modify that for their own tastes. And so I think the because it's so hard to have a tabletop role playing competition scene, I think that world is relatively free of this influence. I mean, that's
In the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, they had competitions at conventions,
yeah,
and it was just to see who could get the most. But that was a much more brutal style of play. It was
yep, yep,
expected your
yep,
character would die a lot. But
yep, yep,
yeah, I mean, I personally I think Shadow Dark is a very interesting game, which is a kind of stripped down, thing. But one of a game that I'm very excited about, I haven't played it yet. I have all the books finally, but is Matt Colville's MCDM Draw Steel. I don't know if you know about this game
I
at
don't
all.
know about
He started
this.
off as a Dungeons and Dragons YouTuber, and then he was like, I don't like Dungeons and Dragons as much as I used to. What if I made a new game? And when he announced it, I thought he did something really interesting. There's all kinds of numbers in the background. There's all kinds of, because good tabletop role playing requires a lot of numbers usually. But he said that he had three ideals, and it was to be tactical, heroic, and cinematic.
Yeah.
And those are not quantitative measures. And
Yep.
he just said every design choice we made was, is it tactical, heroic, or cinematic? And ideally, is it at least two? And I thought that was such an interesting case where in developing the game, he didn't start with the mechanics he disliked. He started with like, what are the ideals for the experience at
Right.
the table that I would like? And that
Yeah.
let him and his team build an entirely new game.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the indie tabletop role playing space is how explicit they are about the multiplicity of reasons why a group might want to play and
Let's
how
let's continue the discussion about indie tabletop role playing
yeah.
for one moment, because for people who haven't played Blades in the Dark, it's a smaller game. One of the things that's really interesting about it is that you have to teach the players how to play it properly if you're running
Yeah.
it, because it's a game that discourages planning. The whole point of the game is you go on some heist or some mission, and then you have flashbacks about how you planned it. And so when I was playing, our sort of game master had to keep saying, "Stop planning, stop planning, stop. Just go into it." And what he was trying to say is like, this game is offering you a new way to have fun,
Yeah.
and you will actually have more fun by following the game's rules. Like, let yourself be out of control for a little bit.
Yeah.
You will enjoy it more once that's happened.
A lot of these games, I think, are really astonishing, like ground up rethinks of how the whole genre goes. I think, um, so John Harper, who made Blades in the Dark, before that, I think Blades in the Dark is a development of a single idea from his micro game Lady Blackbird, which you can all download. It's like half a page. Have you played Lady Blackbird?
I have not. No.
It's a half page rule book. It's designed to just play instantly. And it has this rule. There's this resource, your stamina dice pool that you can add extra dice to any roll. It's like a bonus. It lets you do amazing stuff. But they run out. And then the rule is to get them back. You have to have a refreshment scene with another player, which is a scene in which you share. Sorry, it's a scene in which you invent shared backstory. And in a pinch, you're allowed to do it in a flashback. So this is, I think, where Blades in the Dark came from, and
Mhm.
it does require a complete inversion if you're a traditional role playing player of what you think you're doing, because in some sense there's no way to lose. Right, the game system is built so you have an infinite access to infinitely powerful like a supply of dice, and all you need to do to get access to them is to have a quiet moment and invent shared backstory. And it's
Mhm.
designed, I mean, not designed for long-term play. It's 1 to 3 sessions, but the thing it's trying to do once you give it yourself to it is this like lovely little miracle where the game just like has this pace where every moment something goes off and you get tired. You have to like remember how you like met or remember how you, and that pacing is just delicious. And I think it's a rethink of like what the game is for. The
Mhm.
Apocalypse World games are often also these incredible rethinks. Um, uh, I think part of their core idea is when the player rolls well, the player gets to ask a question from a list of possible questions, and then the GM has to give a positive answer, which means the GM has to invent a part of the world. So one of the characters, for example, in Apocalypse World, when he rolls well on one of his abilities, can choose from the following list of questions. I think they are: what was your lowest point in life? For what do you praise forgiveness, and from whom? Right? And this means that if this player gets to ask this question of somebody like the mafia boss, then this forces the GM to invent a low point for which
Mhm.
they crave forgiveness in the background. And that's, again, I think this profound rethink that uses a scoring system and a point system and a rule system to create a completely alternative relationship to narrative. And I think you're like,
Mhm.
you have to give yourself to it. You have to let yourself have fun in the terms the game is telling you to have fun. And it's completely different from other I think any other narrative experience I have interacting with the system.
So there's like two points that are in my head right now, and I'm not sure if they're totally at tension. I just want to share them with you.
Yeah,
So on the one hand, when you play a game to like maximally enjoy it, you sort of have to give yourself over to its style of play.
yeah, yeah,
But there's also some creativity in like modulating the rules, even if it's a rigid game. So to
yeah,
go back to our early roguelike discussion, I basically, when I play now, if I play Slay the Spire, I'm taking big risk. Like I'm not playing
yeah,
it safe. So I'm losing lots of HP because I'm going for the best relics I can. I'm doing whatever I can because I know that one day it'll pay off and I'll have this amazing combo that'll let me
yeah.
just steamroll everyone. Um, that's one way of playing. It's probably not the most efficient way of playing. I guess maybe it's like I'm modulating, but I'm still like within the spirit of the game because I'm still
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
climb the tower, beat the boss.
I think the reason a certain relationship with games is kind of the opposite to the worrisome relationship to metrics is because they highlight and make possible this feedback loop between the goal you're pursuing it, how you're pursuing it, and your reason for doing so, the particular kind of experience you want to tune into. Different games, I think, have different degrees of lock-in. Like some games kind of force only a single. Like, there are some of these like super fast reflex games I
Mhm.
like Super Hexagon. There's no stylish choices there. It just locks you into one mode of action, and that's it. And then other games, I think, tabletop role playing games are probably the furthest along this, where they have this huge, massive space of different styles that you could modulate to, and
Mhm.
they're different. I mean, I think part of what games are doing is they're transmitting in different ways modes of thinking, and some of them transmit a really narrow one, like
Mhm.
you know, rhythm game, respond. That's it. Um, and I think tabletop role playing is really interesting because it's what it's trying to transmit is an attitude. Often is an attitude of creativity and stylish control. It's trying to help you be a stylish creative, developing your own style. And so
Mhm.
it can't lock you in. Then it would fail, right? But it can't just do nothing. The interesting thing about tabletop role playing, what so many of us have discovered, is if you sit down with no system at all, nothing happens. And
Mhm.
so the systems are these weird things that like they definitely offer a lot of structure that steer you, but they surely cannot hyperstructure it,
Mhm.
or they won't, at least the ones that I'm thinking of that are really interested in like bringing in stylish narrative creative storytelling. They can't do it. So I mean, they're they're like scaffolding your creativity, and that's like one of the hardest things that a person can do. And I think like
Yeah.
in some ways, I think another version of that task is like teaching. Like for me, like in a classroom, I've failed when the students learn exactly what I say, and I've succeeded when they figure out how to think in their own style. And doing
Mhm.
that is super weird and hard. It involves designing systems, but leaving them like a big step back and leaving a lot of space. I think like that's why tabletop role playing games are like so interesting to me. Like, what harder and more noble task is there than building systems that make it easier and encourage people to be fully creative and to find their own style. Like, what
Yeah.
a beautiful, gorgeous task.
The classroom example is interesting because yeah, there's a big difference between learning about philosophy,
Yeah.
which is what you might get in a lecture, and doing philosophy.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's what a mistake I made in my teaching career very often was I will teach them about philosophy and then I will assign them a paper and they will go and do philosophy because those are the
Yes.
same thing. And I was assuming they
Yeah.
were the same things, but they're not the same things. They're
Right.
not, they're very
Yeah.
different activities. And it's like, how do you get them thinking? How do you get them
Right.
asking questions? That's when I had to start doing things like break up into a group, read one page of Aristotle and try to tell me what his argument is.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and that's a
Yep.
simple example, but
Yep.
it would be because it gets them engaged in a way. And we all in the
Yep.
classroom had to find our own
Yep.
structure. In a way, that's a fun example because it's we can steal things from game design there without gamifying.
I openly steal from game design, and I think it's one way to one. Here's the cute, dumb wording I've been using in front of like educational administrators. Gamification and designing for play are totally different things.
Yeah.
And a playful classroom and a gamified classroom are actually opposites. Like the gamified classroom is one that tries to intrude into students' motivations using various techniques to try to force their motivations in one set. And a playful classroom is one that uses various design tricks from games to encourage people to actually figure out what they want to do. And I steal openly, and I tell my students I'm doing this, from indie tabletop role playing design in designing how we do workshops. Like, because tabletop role design is so good. So here's one of my favorite things I've stolen. One of the things that's common throughout a bunch of. Have you played Quiet Year or Microscope?
I have not. No.
These are I demand that you play these games.
Okay.
Microscope is a game where a bunch of people invent a shared history of a world together, jumping back and forth in time and drilling down into scenes. In
Oh,
Quiet Year,
that sounds right up my alley. That sounds amazing.
yeah. And the Quiet Year, so the way the Microscope happens is you build the history, and then when you get down to the level of single scenes, you do it by asking questions. You say like, okay, how, in this earlier stage in history, the elf princess and the dwarf prince were about to get married, and in this stage we know they're at war. How did that happen? Let's have a scene. I want to see, and then you name characters, and then you act it out to answer the question. So
that sounds great. That sounds so much fun.
The Quiet Year is a collective map making game where you play out a year in the life of a village hanging on after the apocalypse, and you take turns inserting challenges and telling the stories of how the villagers get over the challenges. P.S. Both of these can and have been used to be campaign starters. So a group of people can co-develop the history or the setting together before you play into them. Just side note. One thing both of them say that in the designer notes, it's really similar. After a really early start where you collaborate on the background setting, when it's your turn, you insert something into the narrative and you are not allowed to ask other people what they think. Because what they found was when everything happens through collective decision making, you get bland, mediocre stories. And when you get when people are instructed, when it's your turn, insert something into the story. Don't ask other people. And then when it's the next person's turn, they have to insert something without asking that's responsive to the last object. That's when you get explosive and emergent storytelling. So I just stole that for a lot of I have the students often collectively develop like arguments or ideas. And I saw it work in Microscope, and I realized in my classrooms I was having the students collectively agree about each step, and then I just tried that game rule, and it was a miracle. It just worked. Like suddenly their conversations became like 3 times richer, and shyer people got to insert things directly in without having to it was just marvelous.
That's so interesting because it builds, in the story case, it builds narrative tension because people just have different things.
Yep.
And if you asked everybody, they would want to smooth over the tensions because we're just all trying to please each other around the table. But in the classroom setting, it might end up being that they insert premises that aren't going to work together, but you have to kind of see why, and you have to play with it long enough to actually see where it's going to go wrong. That's a really fascinating. Fascinating idea.
Yeah, there's so much to learn from game designers as action structurers. And yeah,
they're kind of social. They're like low scale social engineers. I'm going to design this social setting for you.
There's the goofiest moment for my first book is where I say something like, Mill says we can't just explore different conceptions of the good in our minds. We have to live them out. He calls them experiments in living, and he was thinking of utopian societies. And then I was like, well, games are just really fast experiments in living. We're just trying out different social arrangements under different rule sets and seeing how it goes.
So I'm glad we've stuck so positively to why games are fun and why games are meaningful and interesting. Okay. But off camera, you did mention something more about the exportability of metrics. Let's maybe return to that for a little bit to sort of get to more of what's in the score as well, and why people might want to read it. Because I do think people should read this. I wrote a review on Substack. I said I loved it. I included an anecdote at the end of my review where I mentioned I had outlined a book that was slightly similar. And when I read your book, I told my wife, I wish I'd written this book. And then I actually have now recanted and said, I am glad I didn't write this book because you had thought more about games, and that made the discussion like so much more interesting and like so much deeper. And so I'm telling people to
Yep.
go buy the score. I thought it
Yep.
was. I really think it's a fantastic book.
Thank you. I mean, and I do think also like, I mean, the thing you're saying is, I think when I was writing only about games, it was thinner, and when I was writing like only about metrics, that was thinner. And when in the book, I forced myself to try to explain why games could be good and metrics were bad, and I think it got so much richer because each of those parts keeps the other honest. You
Yeah.
can't just totally complain about scoring systems. I think one of the big differences from there are a lot of books just complaining about metrics, but I feel like having to talk about games every other chapter forces me to be like, no, it can't be all bad. It can't be all terrible because of anyway. So so I think one of the most interesting things for me is this thing that I've been thinking about under the idea of exportability. So a lot of this comes from reading Lorraine Daston. So I was stuck trying to explain what the core of metrics was. And then I found Lorraine Daston's incredible book, Rules. She's an intellectual historian, a historian of science. Her early work is on changing conceptions of objectivity. And this is about changing conceptions of rules, how rules change over time. Um, she says a lot of the kinds of rules we used through much of historical culture were what she calls rules as principles, which are abstract generalizations, but they admit of exceptions, and you can't list them all. You've got to use discernment, sensitivity, expertise to know that it doesn't apply. Like show don't tell, general rule, lots of exceptions. You got to understand the reason why.
Mhm.
Then she says what we get more recently is the rise of mechanical rules, algorithmic rules, and those are rules designed to be applied unthinkingly exactly as written. And she says it's come to dominate our sense of rules, but they are a much they're pretty recent. And then she says to me like the most interesting thing I've read in like a decade. She says, people think that mechanical rules arise with computing machines, but they don't. They arise 100 years earlier in an attempt to cheapen labor by making workers more replaceable, so we don't have to depend on highly sensitive, discerning experts with a lot of background knowledge, but we can just hire and fire. For me, a really easy example of this is if you cook like my mom cooked, like tasting, using a lot of experience, you can't replace her. But if you have McDonald's and you have a very strict recipe and you fix the inputs enough so your strict recipes work, then you can instantly fire someone, slot in somebody else, and they're just measuring and timing and looking at numbers. So, Mechat, I think one of the primary, this has become for me a huge diagnostic tool of what's lying behind Scott's notion of state legibility, right? What's really making it legible to the state is that we've written procedures such that anybody can be slotted in and follow the procedure and get exactly the same result, right? There's a kind of so when you write something into a mechanical procedure, you trade off a lot because you can no longer make those procedures trigger off of subtle, rich things. Uh, you can only make them trigger off of things that anybody can detect. So you have to trade away all kinds of sensitivity. And what you get is radical transferability of the procedure. And I think this is really a lot of the times what we mean by clear. What we mean by clear is that if we so one example I think a really telling example from this literature is one notion of an adult is that they're intellectually and emotionally mature, and another notion of an adult is they're 18 years or older. And the latter is mechanical, and it's such a thinner notion, but it's hyper replicable, it's hyper transferable. And I mean, there are a lot of obviously great reasons to do that. I think that's an important example because it shows us exactly when you want a mechanical procedure. But there are plenty of places where you don't need one, and you can see how much of the richness is lost to make it transferable.
When I think about raising children,
Yeah.
as soon as you have a kid, you're handed a list of benchmarks. By
Yeah.
age this, you're gonna hit this. By age this, you're gonna hit that. And yet, and it becomes very easy to get into a kind of competition with other parents. Oh, my son hit his 3-year-old benchmarks and
Yeah.
he's only 2.5. Uh, but in the day to day of parenting, the question isn't usually, is this age appropriate? That
Right.
shouldn't actually be like, it's, is this like, is this appropriate for this particular child?
Right.
So
Exactly. I mean that.
they're 12, but they're very mature. They can watch a PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're measuring things that you actually know through experience. And if you just swapped
Right.
out another adult, not only would they make a different judgment call, they wouldn't have the relevant knowledge to make the judgment
Yeah.
call.
Here's a massive swing for the rafters. I sometimes I think the same notion of clarity is what's going on with what we're doing with philosophy and math. What we're doing is when we say that the rules are explicit, we mean that they're transferable between people and everyone can assess them the same way. We're a kind of rich poetic moral judgment. Like, don't trust that person. They're an asshole who like
Mhm.
that's not triggering. It might be the actually important thing, but it requires some kind of subtlety. I found out something that has been blowing my mind recently. I can't stop thinking about it. And apparently, I need to track this down, but apparently there's a part of Socrates where Socrates says, never trust a written argument because you can't put the writer to question to figure out if they're actually sincere or thoughtful or intellectually virtuous and
Mhm.
sensitive. And I was just like, that's so wild. That's so different from how we think about things. I've been thinking about this a lot because there are a lot of people in online spaces who are teaching in the era of ChatGPT saying, like, the only way to teach people to think is to teach them they're right, which is
Mhm.
the same standard that produces, I don't know, maybe this is too far, the same standard that produces the desire for very clear legal rules is the thing that's producing this desire for ways to assess people's ways to assess argument and ways to assess people's moral being that's instantly transferable and reliable. Um,
Mhm.
and that there are other kinds of relationships to people that arise from like long, complicated connection and conversation and observation that will never survive the demand for transferability.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that we lose.
I think Walter Ong, in some of his work on the development of literacy, mentions that prior to the sort of widespread mass adoption of the written word, to refute someone required that they were there, because you would have to put their position to the question, and they would respond, and either
Right.
people could judge or they could admit that
Right.
they were wrong.
Yeah.
Where now
Yeah.
we talk about a refutation as a written work. I have
Right.
refuted. um, Moore writes
Yes.
his refutation of idealism as a sort of birth of analytic philosophy. The idealists were not in the room with him,
Yep.
and it becomes a very different. And they might have said, "You don't understand idealism."
I feel like now we're meandering all over the place. And can I give you the place that I've arrived at that I'm like most interested in now?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Please.
and it's really this is not in the book only because I don't have a good clear answer here. So Theodore Porter, that historian of quantification, who's also one of the inspirations for Scott. By the way, if you look at Scott, there's a ton of like I learned this from Porter. I learned this from Porter. Anyway, Porter at one point says because information is a very special kind of knowledge that has been carefully prepared and sterilized to travel and be understood by distant strangers in a distant context.
Mm.
That's one data point. The other data point is from one of my favorite articles ever, Annette Byer's Trust and Antitrust, which starts hysterically with her crapping on people who think morality can arise from a social contract. She says, the idea that morality can arise from free and equally powerful people voluntarily entering into an arrangement with each other is something that only rich dudes at a gentleman's club could ever imagine was the basis for morality. Morality starts in vulnerability and dependence. It's just this amazing moment. And then towards the end of this paper, there's this moment where she returns to this idea and she says, yeah, it's really weird to base your idea of morality on an image of a contract because a contract is a very specific kind of social technology which makes expectations and fines explicit to ease one-off transactions between distant strangers.
Hmm.
And I think somewhere between those two observations is like the great truth of the modern world. And if we could see the larger picture that bound those two, we would see the thing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is behind what we're experiencing.
I think this is a great place to end. I mean, we could talk for hours, but I think
Yeah.
this was a nice point. So I always ask at the end of this podcast if my guest has a recommendation for our audience. I'm looking for a book
Mhm.
you think everybody should read, but maybe not enough people are reading. Do you have
Okay.
something for us?
I think I have just read. Okay, this is a huge warning. So, in some sense, some of the most important books I've already mentioned, like Theodore Porter, Trust in Numbers, Lorraine Daston's Rules. These are incredibly interesting, incredibly readable, rich, amazing, and exploratory. I'm going to recommend a book that I think is incredibly important for right now, but with a caveat, it's really tough to read. It's a really technical book. So it's a book by law professor Julie Cohen. It's called Between Truth and Power. It's an attempt to understand precisely the changes in property law that make our current world of data ownership possible. So, and it's very related to Scott because in the background she's interested in the idea of enclosure of property, the idea that for large amounts of times we had things that were the commons, or we had things that were complexly shared, and then we passed specific laws that allowed particular people to own land and enclose it and make it theirs. And she thinks the same thing has happened, that the current world of data that we're in right now didn't have to be. It is a particular construct of a particular way of envisioning data as ownable that was created by very specific laws that are entirely changeable. So one key, she has a great interesting contrast with the way music works. So the way music ownership works is if I wrote a song and I own it and you try to use it, I can tell you not to. That's part of my relationship to my music. And then she notes that we have a completely different enclosure and separation rule for data. If I interact with a social media platform and they pull data from me, that data is now theirs. I have no rights to that. I cannot recall that. I cannot demand to know where it's used. And that's just a matter of contingent legal specification. I was just thinking about this because I was reading about, I think, like uh, one of the AI companies wanting to charge everyone to take a percentage of any creative work that use their AI. But I'm
Mhm.
100% sure they're not transferring any of that to the data, anyone that made the data on which the AI was trained. And I think like I watched Julie Cohen gave a talk, and I had this experience of like, oh my god, this seems to like be another one of these like incredible explainers of like
Mhm.
the basic structure of what's going on right now.
That sounds great. That sounds great. There's a million questions I could ask there, but we're at the end. So,
Yeah,
Thi Nguyen, thank you for joining me.
thank you so much, man.